Imagine standing in bronze armor weighing 50 pounds, watching 6,000 Persian archers capable of loosing 72,000 arrows per minute prepare to turn you into a pincushion, then receiving orders to sprint 1 full mile across open ground directly into that arrow storm at maximum speed before the volleys can decimate your ranks. September 12. 490 BC, Athenian general Miltiades, with approximately 11,000 Greek hoplites, 10,000 Athenian citizen soldiers, plus 1,000 plataeans, faced Persian commanders Datis and Artaphernes, leading 25,000 professional warriors who had never lost a battle, in living memory, and represented an empire controlling 44% of the world's population. Here's what makes Marathon tactically insane. Miltiades ordered his heavily armored farmers, potters, and craftsmen, part-time soldiers who trained on festival days, to execute a full-speed charge covering 1 mile in approximately 8 minutes to close with elite Persian troops before sustained archery fire could destroy Greek formations. The deliberately weakened Greek center was driven back by Persian and Median elite infantry, but the strengthened wings shattered Persian flanks, then wheeled inward in a devastating double envelopment that trapped the Persian center between 3 converging Greek forces with nowhere to retreat. Result: approximately 6,400 Persian casualties versus 192 Athenian and 11 Plataean dead, a 33-to-1 kill ratio that remains the most lopsided victory in ancient military history. The Greek army then force-marched 26 miles back to Athens in full armor, in one day, the original marathon distance, to prevent Persian naval forces from attacking the undefended city. The victory shattered the myth of Persian invincibility for the first time, saved Greek independence, enabled Athens' democratic experiment to survive, and made possible the golden age that produced Western philosophy, drama, art, and the cultural foundations of European civilization. To understand why Marathon became one of history's most consequential battles, and why those 11,000 Greeks charging into certain death changed the course of human civilization, you need to understand the terrifying scale of what they faced in 490 BC. The Persian Empire was not merely powerful, it was power itself made manifest. Stretch your imagination across the ancient world, from the shores of the Aegean Sea to the mountains of Afghanistan, from the cataracts of the Nile to the steppes of Central Asia. Across this incomprehensible expanse covering over 3 million square miles, one man's word was absolute law: King Darius I the Great, King of Kings, Lord of all lands, from the rising to the setting sun. The empire he ruled contained perhaps 50 million people, roughly 44% of the entire world's population at that time. It encompassed dozens of languages, hundreds of distinct cultures, thousands of cities, Babylon with its legendary hanging gardens, Egypt with its ancient pyramids, the wealthy Phoenician trading cities, the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia. All of it bent the knee to Persian authority. The Persian military machine reflected this vast accumulated wealth. The great king could summon armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands from provinces stretching across 3 continents. His treasury could fund military campaigns lasting years without strain. His empire could absorb defeats that would completely destroy lesser nations and keep fighting indefinitely. Most terrifyingly, no one had ever defeated Persia in open-pitched battle. Not once in 2 generations. Not ever in living memory. The Persians themselves believed with religious conviction they were invincible, and they had overwhelming evidence supporting that belief. Every enemy who had stood against them militarily had been systematically crushed. Every rebellion had been drowned in blood. Every kingdom that resisted had been erased from maps and memory. This was the undefeated empire that now turned its full attention toward punishing a small, insignificant city on the edge of the Greek world, Athens. Athens, in 490 BC, was a peculiar, experimental place that most of the Mediterranean world watched with bemused skepticism. It was not the largest Greek city. That distinction belonged to Syracuse in Sicily. It was not the wealthiest. Corinth controlled more trade. It was certainly not the most militarily powerful. That honor belonged unquestionably to Sparta, with its legendary warriors and society organized entirely around constant warfare. But Athens was attempting something radically new, something most Greeks thought was dangerous madness. 50 years earlier, a reformer named Cleisthenes had reorganized Athenian society along revolutionary lines that shocked the aristocratic Greek world. He systematically broke the political power of old aristocratic families. He created an unprecedented governmental system where every adult male citizen, rich or poor, noble or common, landowner or laborer, had equal voice in the popular assembly. They called this radical experiment democratia, the rule of the people, the power of the masses. It was a fragile, untested experiment that faced constant criticism. Many Greeks across the Mediterranean thought it was collective insanity. How could a state function effectively when potters and farmers had the same political vote as educated aristocrats? How could an army fight with tactical coherence when its generals were elected by popular assembly rather than appointed by hereditary right? How could decisions requiring expertise be made by masses who lacked education? But the Athenians believed passionately in their experiment. They believed with almost religious fervor that free men fighting for their own city, defending their own families, would prove stronger than slaves and subjects fighting for a distant king's glory. Marathon would test that revolutionary belief in the most brutal way imaginable. The Athenian army was not a professional military force with career soldiers. It was the citizens themselves, men who worked as craftsmen, farmers, merchants, potters, who trained in military formations during their spare time, who fought when their city called and returned immediately to their trades when fighting was done. They were called Hoplites after the hoplon, the large round bronze shield that was their primary defense and identity. They fought in a formation called the phalanx, a tight block of men with shields overlapping like scales, spears projecting forward like the quills of an iron porcupine. The phalanx was absolutely devastating in close combat, where its concentrated mass and long spears gave overwhelming advantage, but it was painfully slow-moving, fundamentally vulnerable to cavalry attacks from flanks, and utterly defenseless against sustained mass arrow fire from distance. Against the Persians at Marathon, these part-time citizen soldiers would face professional warriors who had been training for warfare since childhood across the empire. They would face 6,000 elite archers who could loose 12 arrows per minute, each 272,000 arrows per minute total at peak firing rate. They would face cavalry that could sweep around their flanks and cut off retreat routes. By any rational military analysis based on numbers, experience, and tactical advantages, the Greeks should have been completely annihilated within the first hour. But war is not always purely rational, and sometimes the side that should lose by every calculation refuses to accept the mathematics of defeat. The conflict between Athens and Persia did not begin at Marathon. It began with fire and betrayal half a world away. In 499 BC, the Greek cities of Ionia, located on the western coast of what is now Turkey, rose in desperate rebellion against Persian imperial rule for half a century. These prosperous Greek cities had been subjects of the expanding Persian Empire, paying annual tribute, providing soldiers for Persian armies, bowing before Persian-appointed governors. Now, they had collectively decided they'd had enough of foreign domination. The rebellion spread with shocking speed as city after city threw off Persian control. The desperate Ionians needed military help to sustain their revolt against inevitable Persian retaliation. They sent ambassadors across the Aegean Sea, begging their Greek cousins on the mainland for military support. Most Greek city-states refused with diplomatic regrets. The risk was simply too catastrophic. Persia was too overwhelmingly powerful. Challenging the empire meant inviting destruction. But Athens, proud, democratic, experimental Athens, said yes. The Athenians sent 20 warships, a relatively small force numerically, but symbolically devastating in its implications. Athenian hoplites marched alongside Ionian rebels deep into Persian imperial territory. They reached Sardis, the regional capital of Persian power in Asia Minor, and they burned it to the ground. The fire that consumed Sardis was not just a military action, it was an unforgivable insult. A humiliation that struck at Persian imperial prestige. A declaration that insignificant little Athens dared to challenge the might of the King of Kings himself. The Ionian revolt was eventually crushed with systematic brutality. The rebel cities were systematically reconquered. Their populations were punished with exemplary cruelty. Their leaders were publicly executed. Persian power was fully restored across Ionia. But King Darius did not forget the insult. According to the historian Herodotus, the great king ordered a servant to repeat a specific phrase to him 3 times before every single meal. Master. Remember, the Athenians. He remembered. In 490 BC, the great king's long-planned revenge finally arrived on Greek shores with overwhelming force. Darius assembled a punitive expeditionary force, not the full, unimaginable might of the entire Persian Empire, but a formidable professional army nonetheless. Perhaps 25,000 elite soldiers carried across the Aegean by a fleet of 600 warships. The invasion force was commanded by 2 experienced men, Datis, a Median general with decades of successful campaign experience, and Artaphernes, the nephew of King Darius himself, representing imperial family authority. They carried explicit, brutal orders systematically punish every Greek city that had supported the Ionian revolt, and make an example so terrifying that no Greek would ever dare challenge Persian power again. The expedition began with Eretria, a city on the island of Euboea that had sent 5 ships to support the Ionian rebels. Eretria resisted desperately for 6 days behind its walls. Then it fell through betrayal. The Persians executed their standard punishment for resistance. They razed the entire city to its foundations, burned the temples to ashes, rounded up every surviving man, woman, and child, and shipped them east as slaves to distant Mesopotamia, where they would end their days in permanent exile. The city itself was erased from the map as a functioning community. This was the Persian message to Greece. Resistance means total annihilation. Now the fleet turned south toward Athens with methodical purpose. The Persians landed at Marathon, a long curved beach approximately 26 miles northeast of Athens. The landing site was chosen with careful tactical consideration. The plain behind the beach was flat and open, perfect terrain for Persian cavalry to maneuver and charge. A good military road led directly southwest to Athens. Once the Persian army marched down that road with their overwhelming numbers, the city would fall within days. But first,